We are starting.
Yeah, I'll get started as people come back in. Please take your seats. I've got a very easy job again to introduce someone who doesn't really need an introduction. First, I want to applaud Chair Khan for her work on non-compete agreements. I noticed that's been picked up as an interest at the CMA as well. I personally have an interest in non-compete agreements. I see a lot of journalists in the audience here, and the Capitol Forum has never and will never make our journalists sign a non-compete agreement, and we are hiring. So just wanted to get that out there. But on a serious note, this introduction for Chair Khan is going to seem a little redundant. From my earlier introduction, like AAG Cantor, Chair Khan is rigorous, courageous, and not deterred by corporate power and influence. And if you want to better understand the law enforcers that are part of the anti-monopoly movement in the US, these are some of their defining characteristics. And I think that came through earlier in Director Chopra's remarks as well. And specific to Chair Khan, she has a profound interest in the history of law and business and democracy. And one of her talents that really stands out to me is the rigorous way she researches an industry, which I remember all the way back when she was a journalist at Open Markets, and she was studying the grain industry and chicken farming. And the level of detail that she would get into was really remarkable, and it's always been that way in her work. She also has a commitment to putting the citizenry first, in addition to soliciting public comments for a lot of the rules and investigations she does. She has recently traveled around the country to hear from citizens about their views on a major supermarket merger. And so you're hearing a lot of these themes come up over and over again: commitment to the citizenry, rigor, courage, and no one better personifies those than Chair Khan. And please give her and Christina a warm welcome.
Lina, it's great to see you. It's such a pity you're not here in person. Even the mention of your name gets people back in the room after a 5-minute break only. So it is fantastic to be able to have you, albeit not in person. Let me just go straight to the point, because I know you have a hard stop. We had a fantastic discussion through the day with multiple enforcers, but also Ambassador Tai and Rohit Chopra were here, and the general gist of the conversation, the big message that came across, was one of paradigm shift that was occurring at the same time, simultaneously, certainly in antitrust, and you embody that, but in other areas of policy, trade, industrial strategy. Give us a context, give us your view for this moment in history, which is so salient and so transformative. You, of course, are doing a number of things, and they are very much of the moment, but they also represent what your view for the next few years is going to be. Just give us some context and some substance. Thank you.
Well, first of all, it's so great to be with you all. I regret that I can't be there in person, but this event and conference is a must-do every year. It really helps not just convene the current discussion, but drive it forward in such a critical way. So, Christina, you're absolutely right that in the United States, we are at an inflection point. And what we've seen with this administration is a commitment to learning from past mistakes and a recognition that we need a course correction. As Teddy mentioned, I got my start in this work as a business reporter, really talking to everyday people and doing deep dives of various industries, ranging from chicken farming to airlines. And what became very clear was that there was a gap. There was a gap between how antitrust was conceiving of markets and market power and how markets would function and how those markets were actually functioning in the real world. And this gap between theory, models, and reality is one that unfortunately we've seen come up across policy domains. And so there's an effort right now to revisit some of the questionable assumptions that had underpinned our policy paradigms across domains, be it in antitrust and competition, be it in industrial policy, be it in trade policy, and this whole of government approach to revisit these assumptions and make sure we have a more rigorous reality-based understanding of markets and our economy underpinning our policy choices is absolutely critical. Unfortunately, the pandemic really also brought to the surface a whole set of uncomfortable truths about the fragility of our markets, the fragility of the supply chains. And so that lived experience has also been a key catalyst going forward in terms of revisiting assumptions, making sure we're making decisions based on real understandings of how markets and our economy works.
Give us some examples of the way in which this vision is taking hold and is in practice really guiding the kind of cases that you pursue or the issues you pursue at the Federal Trade Commission. We'll go into some examples further with my questions, but give us some sense for how this actually becomes reality.
So with the Federal Trade Commission, our core principle has been fidelity to our mission and mandate. So the FTC Act prohibits unfair methods of competition, and the rule of law requires that we be faithful to that mandate. And unfortunately, sometimes there's been a tendency to say, well, unfair is an uncomfortable word, so let's ignore it. I really worry about that as an approach, and so we've been returning to the text of our statutes and making sure we're fully understanding and hearing from people about what are some of the biggest pain points that they're experiencing, right? I mean, one of the biggest changes that we've seen over the last few years is people connecting the dots between the problems in their day-to-day lives and the policy decisions that are being made in DC, be it in antitrust or other domains. And so the ways that we've seen shortages of the infant formula on the shelves to, senior defense industry officials saying, our national security is at risk because we find ourselves extraordinarily dependent on a very small number of companies, sometimes just one company. Unfortunately, we see right now with Boeing and its planes falling apart in the sky, some of the real hazards of buying into this national champions argument. So those are just some examples of the ways we are identifying the problems in our economy. In terms of the FTC's work, I mean, we're squarely focused on what are some of the biggest pain points that people are facing in their day-to-day lives, right? I mean, antitrust determines, is somebody having to drive 20 miles to go to the nearest hospital? Are they having to go 200 miles? Are people having to choose between buying eggs and milk at the grocery store? Are people able to go get better job opportunities, better wages? Or are they confronting non-competes and other contractual clauses that are locking them into their jobs, right? I mean, these are core issues that determine in a very fundamental way, are people experiencing in their day-to-day lives real opportunity, real possibility, and real freedom, or are people's lives really governed by these unaccountable forces and the whims of these arbitrary giants in ways that creates much more a feeling of coercion rather than of freedom? And so these are just some of the fundamental choices that we face in our work.
And we heard earlier from Jonathan about his own travels across the US, but you have been actually out of the office quite a bit, meeting with people on the ground, with small businesses, with customers, people impacted by the kind of changes that sometimes were being proposed by companies. That is an important part of what you've been doing, and a major change, isn't it, to the entire posture of how one sees enforcement, the connection with the people on the ground, with businesses on the ground.
Look, I'm a public servant. I serve the public. And so a core part of that job, as I see it, is to engage with the public, to hear from the public, to explain what we're doing, but also in turn to be learning from that, right? I mean, I think if one of the set of pathologies in antitrust over the last few decades has stemmed from key blind spots. One key way to mitigate those blind spots is to actually get closer to our understanding of what's really happening in these markets. And so I've had the real privilege to hear from everybody from ranging from cattle and chicken farmers to tech startups to emergency room physicians to really understand how are their markets functioning. Unfortunately, all too often we see key dysfunctions emerge where you've been seeing reports recently of hundreds, if not thousands, of journalists getting laid off. We saw last summer major strikes in Hollywood. Real challenges in making sure that markets are working, and problems that are not emerging from problems that are emerging even when you have contexts where producers are creating something that customers want, and yet somehow the market has been reconfigured so that people are not actually able to produce and get fair and equal pay for what they're creating. And so in all of those instances, we're getting deep. We hear a lot from healthcare workers in particular about, for example, how the incursion of private equity in their field has led to greater financialization, quality degradation, burnout among doctors, which is bad for the doctors, but it's also bad for patients because you see decline in quality of healthcare. And so actually sitting down and hearing from people about what's happening in our economy is just absolutely essential to make sure we're prioritizing our work in the right way, but also able to track in real time some of the challenges that are emerging.
I want to talk about digital and digital mergers. In effect, I think it's fair to say that you have created a view out there in which these deals are pretty much not possible anymore, and they are going to be challenged in a very serious way because the cumulative effect of lax enforcement in the past has created problems that we're trying to deal with now exposed. I don't want to, of course, mischaracterize your position, but there is a very clear sense that you have very much taken the position that these deals are problematic and we should be very cautious going forward in letting them through because of the consequences that we see in the playbook that we see in play out. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Look, I think across digital policymaking, there is a recognition that with the onset of Web 2.0, there were missed opportunities, right? There was a sense that these markets are so fast moving, it's better for government just to step back and get out of the way. And 2 decades on, we're still reeling from the ramifications of that. I mean, we saw the solidification and acceptance of predatory and exploitative business models that have catastrophic effects for our citizenry. We saw, dominant firms be able to buy out a whole set of nascent threats to them in ways that solidified their moats for a long time coming. The FTC has a case ongoing against Meta, of course, that's alleging that the acquisitions of WhatsApp and Instagram were unlawful. And so we just want to make sure that we are learning from those experiences and not repeating some of those missteps, which just requires being extraordinarily vigilant. With the expansion and adoption of greater AI tools, I think this is going to be a key opportunity for us to be putting some of those lessons into practice.
I was going to go there next. You have announced last week a much reported initiative to study partnerships between big tech companies and specific AIs, and this is something which has attracted a lot of attention. You've held a tech summit to explain some of the issues that you saw on the horizon and the need to act before, or at least to inform yourself before seeing the playbook playing again. Would you expand on that plan, and what is your plan, your vision for how you want to deal with that?
So look, there's no doubt that these tools could provide enormous opportunity. They could really catalyze growth and innovation. But historically, we've seen that these moments of technological inflection points and disruption can either open up markets or they can be used to close off markets and double down on existing monopoly power. And so we are taking a holistic look across the AI stack. We've been very fortunate to build up a team of technologists in-house that can help us look under the hood, understand what's going on. And so we've been going layer by layer from chips and cloud and compute to the foundation models to the applications to understand what are the key economic properties here. If we're already seeing certain bottlenecks emerge, what is the source of that bottleneck? Is it, supply issues and supply constraints? Is it market power? Is it self-reinforcing advantages of data that are risking locking in some of the existing dominant players? And so it's a moment of diagnosis and wanting to make sure that our analysis and understanding across the stack is accurate so that we can then be using any policy or enforcement tools as appropriate to try to get ahead where we can, or at least not be decades and decades behind. The FTC also has a consumer protection and privacy mandate. In that context, we want to make sure that the hunger to vacuum up people's data that's going to be stemming from the incentive to constantly be refining and improving your models, that's not leading to wholesale violations of people's privacy, that's not baking in now a whole nother set of reasons to be engaging in surveillance of citizens. And so those are some issues that we're thinking about as well.
At the tech summit I mentioned, you were very effective in describing how on the antitrust side, one of the concerns was very much the potential for concentration of resources, inputs, bottlenecks at one stage of the stack for competition in other domains and in other ways in which products are being used, and how that competition downstream is not going to dissipate necessarily the market power upstream. So that notion of grandfathering market power into the future is at the forefront of the concerns and the research that you're doing, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going layer by layer and we're looking to understand if we are seeing bottlenecks, how do we make sure that that's not resulting in competition being undermined across the stack, right? And so the 6B inquiry that we launched is looking to understand, for example, are some of these partnerships and investments coming with the expectation of exclusivity? Is it going to be coming with certain forms of privileged access? Are these relationships that are giving some dominant firms the ability to exercise influence or control over business strategy in ways that could be undermining competition? And so these are just some of the questions that we're asking at this stage.
So one of the discussions that we had this morning was certainly focused on the future. We don't know what the future holds, but there is a certain degree of optimism for some that there might be a second term for President Biden. Regardless of what the outcome of that is going to be, what is your own agenda, if you like, for how you would like to see the next 4 years, if you had another 4 years ahead of you? What would you prioritize?
Look, I mean, I'm incredibly proud and excited about the progress we've been able to make so far, but there's no doubt that in many ways it feels like we're just getting started and there's so much more to be doing. And so building on these areas in really key ways is going to be important. We've already started a whole set of litigations that we're going to be seeing through, in addition to some of our tech cases. For example, last September, we sued a private equity company that had executed a roll-up of anesthesiology providers. That's something we're looking to see through. And since launching that lawsuit, it's kind of opened up the floodgates. So we're hearing a lot more about other areas where we've seen these private equity roll-ups. More generally, we're also very focused on ensuring antitrust protects everybody, that it protects consumers, but that it also protects workers. And so as Teddy mentioned, last year, we brought some lawsuits where we believed that the firm's use of non-competes was unlawful. that led to thousands of non-competes being dropped for security guards, for workers in the glass industry. And then we also proposed a rule to eliminate non-competes that we're hoping to be able to look through the 25,000 comments and be able to finalize. And so identifying other ways in which market power and monopoly power is being used to squeeze not just consumers, but workers is going to be a key part of that. And so that's just some of the work that we'll be continuing to build on.
What about the whole area? I know it's an area that you care about, of data protection and its intersection with antitrust. This is an area that the agency has engaged in. In Europe, and the discussion was there this morning, we're still struggling to see a real intersection between the two. There's still a sense that we can do a lot more and a lot better, notwithstanding some of the sort of well-meaning regulation that we have in place. The question is, to what extent these are bearing fruit in practice. I know that you personally think that that is an area which is incredibly important, and maybe you can give us a few words on that before I know you have a hard stop.
So we're absolutely looking to make sure we're closely scrutinizing the ways in which privacy violations and the endless hoovering up of people's data can be used to build and solidify and entrench monopoly power. And then that monopoly power in turn can give companies license to further violate people's privacy and surveil them without real checks in the marketplace. And so there is a deep interconnection here between the competition and the market power and monopoly power issues and how people's data is being collected and hoarded. The FTC, through our enforcement actions over the last couple of years, has been creating bright lines. And so we brought a whole set of lawsuits relating to the use and collection of people's very sensitive data. So for example, people's geolocation data or people's health data. And we've made clear to the market that if you're collecting, say, people's sensitive health data to provide them a health service, you can't then turn around and quietly be marketing that data or selling it. We're very aware of the ways in which you see both shape-shifting by players, but also the ways in which conglomerate entities can sometimes get a further advantage in the market if they're collecting data from one arm and then able to endlessly use it throughout the business operation. So those are just some of the issues that are top of mind as we tackle this.
And just final before you go. I mean, in Europe, we've been wrestling with these issues of enforcing data protection for some time, and yet we see that this isn't really kind of yet delivering anything. Do you ever see a time when these companies that are so far being treated as normal companies, just with some guardrails, do you ever see a time when we can actually proceed to consider some of them common carriers, designate them as common carriers with statutory obligation that are not in any way in question?
Look, as a student of history, I definitely appreciate the ways in which common carrier and non-discrimination regimes have been an essential tool across how we've done economic governance and economic policymaking. I know there are some really interesting lawsuits currently pending that are asking this very question. And so I think traditionally we've had at least two paradigms, right? One is antitrust and competition, where we've said it's rivalry and the process of rivalry that's going to discipline how companies can use their power. But we've also, of course, recognized that in some sectors, you're just going to have economies of scale and the self-reinforcing advantages of scale that are not going to create competition. And in those instances, the check has to be coming from other policy tools, be it non-discrimination requirements, be it interoperability requirements, be it structural separations. And so I think the kind of intellectual loss of that toolkit and now the recovery of it is just an absolutely critical part of this policy discussion as well.
Thank you so much. And I know you need to really go because I'm told you have an absolutely hard stop 2 minutes ago. So I would like to ask the audience to join me in thanking you for this. And I hope you'll be able to come in person next time. Thank you so much, Lina.
Thanks so much. Take care, everybody.